This was about how little he saw me now, not as a father who had sacrificed, not as a man with a past, just an old presence taking up space, holding on to objects he didn't deserve. And in that moment, standing in my own living room, I felt a shift, something quiet but permanent. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I let him talk until his words ran out. When he finally noticed my silence, he frowned. "What?" "I'm listening," I said, but what I was really doing was understanding. Understanding that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or cruelty. Sometimes arise politely, wearing familiarity, convinced it has done nothing wrong. And sometimes the deepest hurt comes not from losing things, but from realizing the person who took them no longer knows who you are. It wasn't the walls or the furniture. It was the air itself, thin and gray, like a late afternoon that never quite decided whether it wanted to become evening. The light coming through the window had lost its warmth. It rested on the floor in long, tired strips, touching places that hadn't been disturbed in a while. Dust floated lazily, turning gold and then dull again as clouds passed outside. The house felt quieter than usual, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your ears and makes your chest feel heavy for no clear reason. I was standing in the living room, holding my keys, when I realized something was wrong. The shelf by the wall looked bare. At first, my mind tried to correct it. Maybe I'd moved things earlier. Maybe my eyes were tired. I took a step closer, slow, almost careful, like the room might react if I moved too suddenly. The empty space stared back at me, clean in a way it never was. No faded photo frame. No small wooden box. No old radio with a cracked dial that only picked up one station, if you turned it just right. My heart gave a small, confused beat. I put the keys down on the table, the sound too loud in the silence, and reached out, touching the shelf as if the objects might reappear under my fingers. The wood felt cold, real, unforgiving. That was when I knew something had been taken. I didn't panic right away. I just stood there, breathing slowly, letting my eyes travel across the room. The clock on the wall was gone. The one my wife gave me on our 10th anniversary. The leather-bound notebook that sat beside the lamp, missing. Even the old watch that hadn't worked in years, but still lived in the drawer under the TV. My belongings. Not expensive things. Not things anyone would break into a house for. Things that carried weight only because they had lived with me for decades. Things that remembered me. The house hadn't been broken into. The door was locked. The windows were intact. Only one person had a key besides me. My son. I lowered myself onto the couch slowly, like my body suddenly remembered its age. The cushion sighed under my weight. My hands rested on my knees, and for a long moment, I just stared at the floor. I tried to tell myself there was an explanation. A good one. A harmless one. Maybe he'd moved things for cleaning. Maybe he was fixing something. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding that I would laugh about later. But deep down, something colder had already settled. My son sold my belongings behind my back. The thought didn't arrive loudly. It slipped in quietly, like a draft through a crack in the door. It sat with me, unwelcome but undeniable. I raised him in this house. Every inch of it carried echoes of his childhood. Scuffed corners from toy cars, pencil marks on the wall we never fully erased, the dent in the hallway, where he once felt learning to ride his bike indoors despite my warnings. I remember the sound of his laughter bouncing off these walls, the way he used to run to the door when I came home from work, shoes untied, face full of questions about my day. I remembered staying up late at the kitchen table, counting bills, stretching paychecks, telling myself that as long as he had what he needed, I could manage with less. I remembered selling my own things back then without complaint. Tools, old records, a jacket I loved, because his school trip or his broken laptop mattered more. So when I picked up my phone to call him, my hand trembled just a little. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice casual, light. Too light. "Did you come by the house today?" I asked. There was a pause. Just half a second. But it was enough. "Yeah," he said. "Why?" I swallowed. Some things are missing. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, that. My fingers tightened around the phone. What do you mean, that? He exhaled, like I was being difficult. I sold some stuff. You weren't using it. The words landed heavy and blunt, like a box dropped on the floor. You sold my things, I said slowly. Dad, relax, he replied. They were just sitting there. I looked around the room again. The empty spaces felt louder now. You didn't ask me. I knew you'd say no. That sentence did something to me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something closer to grief. How much? I asked. Does it matter? Yes, I said. It does. He hesitated, then named a number. It was low. Insultingly low. I almost laughed, but nothing came out. And why? I asked. There was a shuffle on the other end of the line. I needed the money. For what? Silence. For what? I repeated, my voice firmer now. Things, he said. Life. Rent. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I had known for most of my life. That's why it hurt. You could have asked me, I said. You always make it complicated, he snapped. I didn't think you'd even notice. That was when the line broke inside me. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I noticed because those things were pieces of my life. Pieces of his mother. Pieces of years spent surviving, loving, losing, and holding on. I noticed because I wasn't invisible. Or at least, I didn't think I was. Bring the money back, I said quietly, and we'll talk. I already spent it, he replied. The call ended not with goodbye, but with a click. I sat there long after, the phone resting uselessly in my hand. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved in closer, listening. I thought about confronting him, demanding explanations, raising my voice the way I used to when he was a teenager and missed curfew. But this was different. This wasn't rebellion. This was entitlement. Over the next few days, the house changed in ways I hadn't expected. Every empty space became a reminder. Every missing item whispered questions I didn't know how to answer. I found myself opening drawers just to confirm what I already knew. Yes, it was still gone. No, it hadn't magically returned. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was thin and restless. I dreamed of my wife's laugh, the way she used to tease me about keeping old junk. You don't need all this, she'd say, smiling, leaning against the doorway. But she never threw anything away without asking. She understood that memories sometimes needed a physical place to rest. I wondered what she would have said about our son now. I didn't call him again. Not right away. I needed to understand what had happened. Not just the selling of things, but the quiet decision behind it. The choice he made to see my life as storage, my memories as inventory. Weeks passed. He didn't apologize. He didn't replace anything. He acted like nothing had happened, and that somehow hurt more than the loss itself. One afternoon, he showed up unannounced. I heard his knock and felt my chest tighten. When I opened the door, he stood there, taller than I remembered, shoulders tense, eyes already defensive. Why are you mad? He asked, stepping inside like he still lived there. I closed the door behind him slowly. You sold my belongings without my permission. He rolled his eyes. You're still on that? I gestured to the room. Look around. He did briefly, shrugged. You don't need all this stuff, Dad. The words were familiar, practical, empty. I needed respect, I said. He laughed, short and sharp. You're being dramatic. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about the things. That was the strange part. I just stood there while he filled the silence with explanations that sounded rehearsed, like lines he practiced in his head on the drive over. Words about how hard things were for him, how expensive life had become, how I didn't really understand the pressure he was under. I nodded once or twice, not because I agreed, but because my body remembered the old habit of listening when he spoke. At some point, he realized I wasn't arguing back. He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in that moment. You're not saying anything, he said. I've said what I needed to say. I replied, That's it. That's it. He scoffed, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and headed for the door. "You're being stubborn," he muttered. "You'll get over it." The door closed behind him with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. I didn't move right away. I stood there, facing the door, my reflection faint in the glass panel. My hair looked grayer than I remembered, my shoulders slightly more rounded. I looked like someone who had spent his life bending, adjusting, making room for others. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic moment, no vow spoken aloud. It was simply a realization settling into place. I would stop pretending this hadn't changed something. I would stop minimizing my own hurt to make things easier for him. I would stop being invisible. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice patterns I had ignored for years. How often he assumed my time was his. How easily he borrowed things without returning them. How conversations always seemed to circle back to his needs, his problems, his plans. How rarely he asked about mine. I wasn't angry all the time. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. Tired of justifying myself. Tired of carrying the weight of understanding alone. One afternoon, while cleaning out the spare room, I found an old photo album tucked behind a box of winter coats. I sat on the floor and flipped through it slowly. There he was as a toddler, sitting on my shoulders, gripping my hair like reins. There he was on his first day of school, backpack too big, smile uncertain. There we were together, just the two of us, after his mother passed, standing in front of the cake neither of us had much appetite for. I closed the album and held it against my chest. Those memories hadn't been sold. Not yet, but I realized how close they had come. When he called a few days later, I let it ring longer than usual before answering. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Listen, I need a favor." I waited. I'm short on rent again. Just until next month. I took a breath. "No." There was silence on the line. Then disbelief. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. You've never said no to me." "I know." He laughed, thinking I was joking. "Come on, don't do this." "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I'm setting a boundary." The word seemed to irritate him. "You're punishing me." "I'm protecting myself." He grew defensive, his voice rising. "After everything I've been through, and after everything I've given," I replied, still quiet. He hung up on me. This time, the click didn't hurt as much as I expected. It felt final, like a door closing that should have been closed years ago. Days turned into weeks again. He stopped calling. I didn't chase. Friends noticed a change in me, though they couldn't quite name it. I walked slower, spoke less, but there was a steadiness I hadn't had before, a kind of groundedness that comes from finally standing on your own side. Then one evening, there was another knock at the door. He looked different, thinner, tired in a way that reminded me of myself. "I messed up," he said, not meeting my eyes. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat across from each other, the empty spaces between us more noticeable now. He fidgeted with his hands. "I didn't realize how much those things meant to you," he said. I waited. "I thought you'd always be there to fix things," he admitted. "I didn't think about losing you." That sentence landed softly, but it landed. "I was there," I said. "I still am, but not like before." He nodded slowly. "I want to make it right." "How?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I want to try." I studied his face. The boy was gone. The man was still learning. "You can't buy back what you sold," I said, "but you can earn back trust." He swallowed. "I understand." We didn't hug. Not yet. But when he left that night, he turned back at the door. "I'm sorry," he said. This time, it didn't sound rehearsed. The house felt quieter again after he left. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not heavy, not suffocating. Healing, I learned, always looked like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Like choosing dignity over comfort. Like teaching someone how to treat you by finally treating yourself better. Some things were gone forever. But something else had returned. My sense of self. IT didn't rush to fix anything. It didn't tie the story up neatly or soften the edges right away. Instead, it slowed down, as if giving both of us space to sit with what had finally been said out loud. Days passed without messages. Weeks passed without favors being asked. And for the first time in a long while, the distance between us felt intentional instead of hostile. I started rebuilding my routines, not replacing the things he sold. Those were gone, and I refused to chase ghosts, but rebuilding myself. I rearranged the living room, moved the couch closer to the window, let more light in. I hung a single photograph on the wall, one I'd kept tucked away in a drawer, because it hurt too much to look at before. It was an old picture of me and his mother, taken on a windy afternoon by the sea. Our hair was a mess, our smiles unguarded. I stood there one morning, coffee cooling in my hand, and let myself feel the ache fully without pushing it away. I began saying no more often, to neighbors who wanted help without gratitude, to relatives who only called when they needed something. Each no felt awkward at first, like wearing new shoes that hadn't broken in yet. But slowly it felt natural, necessary. My son kept his word, in his own quiet way. He didn't show up with grand gestures or dramatic apologies. Instead, he started small. He asked before visiting. He listened more than he spoke. When I mentioned needing help fixing the fence, he came over the next weekend without complaint, worked in silence beside me, and left without asking for anything in return. One afternoon, while we were stacking tools back into the shed, he hesitated. "I found one of your things," he said. I looked at him. "Found?" "The radio," he explained. "The old one. The guy I sold it to still had it. He didn't want much for it. He reached into his car and brought it out carefully, like something fragile. The crack in the dial was still there. The smell of dust and age was still the same. I ran my hand over it slowly. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "I wanted to," he replied. "Not to erase what I did, just to acknowledge it." That mattered more than he knew. We didn't go back to how things were before. And that was the point. Our relationship became quieter, more honest, less dependent. He learned that love didn't mean access. I learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting yourself. One evening, months later, we sat on the porch as the sky shifted from blue to deep orange. He asked me questions then, real ones, about my childhood, about his mother, about the years I'd spent carrying everything without complaint. "I didn't see you," he admitted softly. "Not really." "I know," I said, "but you're seeing me now." The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere inside the house, the old radio hummed faintly, catching a station just barely, like it always had. Some people think betrayal always ends relationships, that once something is broken, it can never hold weight again. But sometimes betrayal doesn't end love. It exposes what love needs in order to survive. My son sold my belongings behind my back, but what he really took, without realizing it, was my silence. And when I finally reclaimed that, everything else began to fall into place.